We're beginning to narrow our focus now, coming from the wide angle view of spiritual factors in mental health and coming a little bit closer to the focus of today, which is chaplaincy within the primary care world. And we're very pleased to have Drs. David Smart and Paul Turner with us today. They're going to introduce themselves, but the topic for today, for now, is beginning to look at the primary care world and particularly mental health within that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Do you want to start by saying who you are? Thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. It has been amazing, hasn't it? It's been a remarkable morning so far. I'm a GP. I'm a friend of Ross Bryson's and worked with him for a very long time. And it's lovely to see a lot of our colleagues here, lots of faces that are familiar and from the present and the past and new ones too. David and I have been working together at a distance for 20 odd years probably. We were connected together by another colleague of ours, David Shires, who was a very sort of influential guy who was determined to connect people. And we're grateful to be here. What we're going to be talking about is brokenness. And I can say to you today officially that brokenness is the new cool. We're all talking about it. Everyone's talking about it. The government's talking about it. Trust chief executives are talking about it. Wes Streeting is obviously talking about it, and Lord Darcy's talking about it. And for those of us who have had frustration with the way that our service, our healthcare service, treats people and doesn't see them as real humans, this potentially can offer some hope. So this collective sense that something is broken can potentially lead to collaboration, to greater connection, and to a kind of a healing and a rapprochement of what some of the ideals are that we hold to. Thomas Merton said that there's no hope without humility. And so our hope is that the brokenness that we see, which we're about to sort of describe, is a source and a channel to a kind of collective humility to see we've got something important to do and let's find a way to do it together. So what we're going to talk about is brokenness. We're going to sort of try and describe as succinctly as we can why we think some of the things are broken that are broken. Now, many of these things are things you already know, but we're just going to bear with us over that. We're going to then sort of try and describe something about wellness and what it means in healthcare, and then some thoughts on how to get from one to the other, how clinicians need to perhaps change, and perhaps somehow the mindset that needs to change. For example, the fact that we keep measuring wellness, we keep measuring how people function in monetary terms, and how about just using human terms as a way of describing that? We also need to validate and normalize the value of the spirit. And we've heard a lot about that, and it's really hard to communicate it, but we need to do that. And then some examples of what wellness services can look like and do look like and have looked like that are around. We're going to be talking a lot about disconnection and reconnection. And one of the frustrations I've always had about the use of the word religion, which is so exclusive to many people, is that it's a kind of a misunderstanding of the word. It is, as Chris said, it's about religious practice that people are. Whereas religion, the root is religio, it's reconnection of us with ourselves, us with God, or whatever we believe outside that has created us, or the reason for we're here, and connection with one another. And so we're using this channel again of kintsugi to describe that, the kintsugi bowl, which is a beautiful representation of that. So I want to start with a story. So the story is of a woman whose real name is not Daphne. A number of years ago, she was seen by one of my partners in my practice, and I suppose you describe her as just someone who came across as angry, always angry about something. And she'd never really felt accepted. She'd felt like she was the black sheep of the family. Her life had been surrounded really by trauma and anger and domestic violence and a lack of sense of being nurtured or loved, really. Her son had been killed in gang warfare, and her daughter, we think, had killed her partner because he was, abusing her domestically. It was all a bit hazy. But the long and short of it, here was this woman who had multi-morbidity. In other words, she had many different conditions. She wasn't looking after herself, and she was angry. And somebody referred her to the chaplains that we have in our practice. And I should say at the start, I can't imagine a world without having a chaplain in my practice, and it's a real privilege to have that. So what the chaplain did, very simply, I think, was to kind of follow some of the things we've heard already this morning, allowed her to ventilate her fears, her deepest fears about herself, the hatred she had about herself and others, and the anger and all those things that had built up over time. And to do that without judgment. And it's a simple process in many ways, if you connect with the person who's able to do that for you. And for her, she was given respect. And I guess she's never had respect. As she talked about the possibility of forgiving herself, forgiving other people, just talking about the things that might be possible. And it really seemed to have made a difference. And over the years, I saw her in the practice, and she'd come in and she's a bit cheeky and, have a bit of a laugh. And the anger seemed to have dissipated somewhat. And the hostility. And it seemed like a pretty good improvement until a certain number of years later, when I saw her again. But that's another story. You have to wait and stay awake till the end to hear. So, we're going to just talk about, I'm just going to describe the post-COVID world, the world we're all living in. And this is a really interesting, some interesting stuff which came from the British Academy, which did a report on the post-COVID world, which suggested that COVID, as we all know, has simply exposed significant societal needs, which are there for all to see. Now, on the back of social changes, the world of social media, the flurry of individualism, which of course is basically all around the world, we have got a situation in which trust in virtually every establishment has diminished. Healthcare professionals still remain sort of fairly high up on that list, but it is diminished. Inequity is a substantial legacy of COVID. In other words, the dividing of the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, and this is particularly noticeable in the UK and the US, places where inequity, there's a lot more rich people essentially, and so this creates a new poverty, which is hard to see how you can remove. The cohesion and the governance within society have fragmented. We all see it. The roads, the police, the this and that. Can't get an appointment to see a doctor because they're all at conferences like this. That sort of thing. And there's a real difficulty in the health service, and I'll talk about it in a couple of minutes, about that loss of trust that we have with our colleagues. Mental health has been affected, clearly, by the effects of lockdown, by the effects of fear, by the effects of loss and death. And the sustainability of societies and communities has been affected and rocked. And clearly, when you look at how these things impact upon Maslow's hierarchy of need, it's very easy to see that the bottom has gone out of a lot of people's worlds, hasn't it? So it's not really a surprise to find ourselves in a broken state quite often in society. Dallas Willard, who some of you may have come across, said this: your system is perfectly designed to yield the results you're getting. That kind of tells us all we need to know, doesn't it? So what is the system that we have? Well, we think We think we're so clever, don't we? We really do. We do. I spoke to a colleague of mine who's a neurologist this week, and he was telling me about some fancy thing that they do in London for people who've got essential tremor, and they do this MRI, ultrasound scan. This is going over my head too, so don't worry. And it's amazing because it just stops, it pinpoints the part of the brain where that develops essential tremor, and it's gone. That's great. And I thought, oh, that's lovely. Yeah. It's really good. But we still can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again because he's, Humpty is broken. Now, the GMC, good medical practice, which is the sort of the standard, really, of what we're aspiring to as doctors, in 2024 stated this, and I'll just read some of this on the section on patients, partnership, and collaboration. So the approach and attitude of a medical professional can have a lasting impact on a patient. No surprises there. Treating patients with kindness, compassion, and respect can profoundly shape their experience of care. In assessing patients, we should assess their symptoms, relevant psychological, spiritual, social, economic, and cultural factors, as well as their views, needs, and values. Now, that's all very well, but another question is, how do you support a generation of practitioners who can actually deliver that? Because actually there's needs, and our last speaker spoke eloquently on the cost and the moral injury of dealing with that kind of thing, and that's just simply not there. There's a lack of connection there. We know so much, don't we, about medicine. We know about genomics, we know about physiology, but we fail to... Our structures and our drivers and the focus of much of what we do simply don't allow us to practice in that way. If we go back to the NHS inception, there's something about the NHS spirit, which is, again, probably hard to find, but I sort of think of it as connection and care. There's many more things, but that's what I want to focus on just now, because the connectedness that we had 20, 30 years ago, and I'm not trying to say it was all good in the past. That's far from what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to do is to distill some of the things that were present at the inception. There was a delivery, a determination to deliver care in collaboration with your colleagues. 20 years ago, I probably have 30 telephone numbers of consultants on my phone, and I would call them regularly. Now, I might have one, two at most, and many of my colleagues would never deign to call a consultant any time. The disconnect between primary and secondary care is extraordinary. That means you can't hand people on. You can't share the burden of care, and that makes a big difference. The other thing I just want to highlight is that medical education has changed. 30 years ago, there was this real sense amongst a lot of thinkers and researchers that person-centered care, the kind of things that have been sort of spoken about earlier, was really where we're at. There was a sort of a consensus. Everyone did it. We all focus on we think about the inner consultation. We think about the fly on the wall. What am I doing now? And many of our new doctors coming through, their training just doesn't allow that to the same extent that it used to. So the focus is far more on a different kind of approach, which is essentially becoming a much more of a transactional approach. So there's a really interesting line in a book I read recently by Barbara Kingsolver called Unsheltered, which is a fabulous book about the time just pre-Trump, first time around in the US. And she says, essentially, that in a world of continual loss, where we are half burned, people crave comfort and succor. And this is kind of borne out by some work that Iona Heath, the past president of the College of GPs, described really well in various places. The difference between a relational service and a transactional service. People need a relational service, the connection, something that homes them in, lets them know they've been heard and seen and touched. And what increasingly our service is making us do is become transactional. We haven't got enough appointments. It takes this long time to see a doctor. You need more investigations and so on and so forth in an increasingly politicized landscape. And that makes the world of being a jobbing GP really, really difficult these days to do something else. So we are in a situation where we've got an increasingly binary view of the world. So historically within mental health, the way we've dealt with it is think, okay, well, let's put a sticking plaster. For centuries, we've been giving ourselves opium to make us feel better. Yeah, and then we find some clever drugs and we give those to people. And then someone realizes that we're giving too many serotonin reuptake inhibitors like fluoxetine, and paroxetine, that sort of thing. And so they say, okay, well, let's use some of that money to put it into psychological therapy. The trouble is that we develop, therefore, a kind of binary view of the world. On one hand, you've got a chemical imbalance in your head, and therefore we can give medication for that. And the numbers of people on SSRIs, so-called antidepressants, has doubled in the last decade or so to about 80 million prescriptions every year. That's more than one for every single member of the population, children included. And on the other hand, we developed sort of 15 years ago this kind of idea that, yes, we should be bringing in psychological therapy. The problem is the psychological therapy that was chosen was CBT, and CBT is fine for people it works for, but it's so thin and it's so kind of rules-based and sort of tick-boxy. It ends up making people feel like numbers. So again, it's just described this whole idea of working out how to have a holistic approach is really difficult. We find it really difficult as human beings. I can focus on this bit, but not that and that and that simultaneously. So then you've got a situation post-COVID where the illness, the National Health Service, which has become an illness service really, is suffering even more. So we've got really long waiting lists. We've got, although we're providing extra consultations in primary care, it's still not enough. Loads of GPs retired through COVID. There was a period of time when every day of the month, another GP over 55 was retiring and not being replaced. A number of reasons for that. And there is less continuity of care. We've got a sense of moral injury, and many of us, we carry that legacy of what it was like. Obviously, I'm not an ITU doctor or nurse, but we still carry that. And that's the legacy, which then leads to low morale. And in patients, it is led to fear and to anxiety and to mistrust. And the media has, I'm afraid, as we all know, sort of stoked some of that stuff and doesn't make it very easy to function. So now what I'm going to do is lead on to David to talk a bit more about resources and how they've been broken.
Thank you so much, and what an honour to be here, and what a great day already. I've been compared to David Essex, so that's a result for me. So thank you for that already, and for that amazing talk earlier, and to honour Kintsugi Hope and this idea of connected and how we can actually be the glue. Could we? Let's be honest. Could we be the glue that brings things back together? Because if we're not going to do it, who is? So I think one of the key things so to introduce myself, I've been a GP. I came out of a primary care family, care team. I was born into a vicarage. My mum's a midwife, my sister's a health visitor, my other sister is in education. So there you go. I had to have this whole person idea, which I've tried to put into practice for 30 odd years in a deprived practice in mental health commissioning training, working with public health, NHS England, and OHID, as it is now. OHID, I don't know what that really stands for, but it was Public Health England, for those that can make sense of that. It's Office of Health and Improvement and Disabilities, or anyway, there you go. We don't understand it. I don't know that they do. But I think one of the key things that I've been doing recently as I've retired, I've been throwing out old papers. And I've worked with Paul and honoured colleagues for many years, for over 2 decades. And these 4 areas that you see on the screen were there 20 years ago. They're the same 4 of the gaps in healthcare. And what we've tended to do in healthcare is to bolt things in, but we don't integrate. Now, we're in a new world of what's called integrated care systems, so there is new opportunities. We're in a very tight financial bind at the moment, so people are going to need to work together. So I would argue that now is the time to join things up. There are many good examples, but they often only have short-term funding, and that's one of the key problems. And then they show good results, and then, unfortunately, they're not continued. So it's a commissioning cycle, and I've tried to work into that integrated commissioning. But there are opportunities of social care, thinking about it. So one of the key calls, one key call I'd encourage us all to do, is I now have left general practice 3 years ago. I now work in the voluntary sector, but it's called the VCSE. Can we actually make it the VCFSE? In other words, can we actually call on our social care colleagues and call in all communities, what is the faith community contribution? And I will show you slides that demonstrate it's sizable. Can we call on to have the VCFSE, as called the third sector, integrated into healthcare? If we had that one point, you would create conversations. What is it? What does faith communities mean? What are they? What do they contribute? And I'll show you. So we had this great call from this morning, or earlier, from Patrick around Desmond Tutu. And this is such a fantastic quote. It's time to really start working upstream. And there are 4 words I want to start with, which I meant to start with. Connectedness. We've heard a lot about that. That really matters. Confidence. Confide, with faith. And control. Those 3 words are actually the 3 words of the Health Creation Alliance, and I'll talk about health creation, because that's what we need to be thinking about. We also need to add in compassion, and I think that's a strength we have with our faith, and particularly with chaplains. So just a quick quiz, are those in the right order? Here are your population health outcomes. You're looking at population health outcomes. Are they in the right order? Yes or no? Give you a moment to think about it, recognizing time. Which order? Are they in the order of importance of which percentage is going to give you the best, the biggest improvement in health outcome? They are. But it's a bit of a surprise, I would argue, that actually, where do we spend the money? I was trying to look at another slide. Nearly all of the funding goes into healthcare, yet it actually makes 20% difference to our health outcomes. Our behavior change makes 30%. What we do, what we smoke, what we drink, what we eat, our exercise makes more difference. So public mental health really, really matters. And I think that's a key thing of thinking. Socioeconomic, we've had Maslow's hierarchy earlier. Poverty is the biggest thing that influences mental health and well-being. The OHID looked internationally. They said, what is the one thing we can do? Give people a living wage. That would have the best impact on mental well-being, because people choose healthier diets. They have access to other resources. I love this slide. Now, I appreciate, guys at the back, that you're not going to be able to read that. You're not going to be able to read that. This is a 2008 report on mental capital and well-being, but it explains the trajectory of life from birth all the way through to life. As I colloquially like to say, sperm to worm, because actually it is prenatal and it's also in grief. It matters across the whole life course. It's a life course matters. Mental health, 50% of mental health can be diagnosed by 14. 50%, 75% by about 19 of adult mental health disorder. So our children's mental health really matters. Starting well really matters. This defines it, but Paul and I have studied this slide. We can't see spirituality in here. We can see connectedness, we can see culture, we can see permissiveness, it's all in there. But it's interesting, but out of this slide came the 5 ways to well-being, which I'll talk on. I want to really focus on the thing that we need to measure the right things. A lot of our NHS and a lot of our culture doesn't measure the right thing. The government measures GDP, and it creates a competition, which is a zero-sum game. Actually, if we had more compassion, and love is infinite, love brings more growth, but competition brings less. So I'm just going to keep going, but this is a major problem now. We've now moved from 1 in 6 people with mental disorder to about 1 in 4. Depends on the population. Youth mental health is even worse. And female youth population is even worse than that. So it's a real problem. But it's this oppression of the person and society causing isolation. This could be a solution. If we focused on our personal choices, where we have agency, we can improve our happiness, and I will describe what you can do. If we did that in our community, into a kinder world, we would actually end up with more thriving communities. That is a vision. It's the vision of Action for Happiness, Lord Layard, Anthony Selden, and it's an international charity that has come up with this 10 keys to happier living. There are cards, postcards, which are on the ACGP desk or the Go Health desk you can get, but the Action of Happiness is an international charity. We have a hub in Northampton. The 5 ways to well-being are the same as the GREAT, so you can now remember them. I used to tease my public health colleagues, what are the 5 ways to well-being? They couldn't remember them, but they are great. The DREAM actually describes why we don't put them into practice. We need to set goals, we need to actually have meaning, which is very key here. It's the only framework I know that is bio, psychological, social, and spiritual. Meaning is included, meaning and purpose. And there's a lot of research. I was at the World Happiness Summit this year. It was all on purpose and meaning. So there's really a lot of research, and you had people very eloquently describing their faith. So Arthur Brooke described his own faith. Middle of a conference, 1,000 people describing his passion about his worship of the divine, his worship of God, matters to him. And he gave the research. And he's a Harvard professor. So that was quite good for me to feel alongside. One model that I hope, Ross was saying, how do we fit spiritual health into the NHS? It's part of our journey. A lot of people, you heard Patrick earlier describe his journey and my own journey of my own episode of mood disorder. Despite all the research and everything else, 10 years ago, I hit crisis. But it's the spiritual aspect. Sometimes in those really difficult moments, we have spiritual growth. And there are things I learned a lot in that time. This is a model looking at the medication we've heard about, the psychological, but my key focus that I've been trying to look at is how we have personal well-being plans. And John Kabat-Zinn has described, if you don't weave your parachute daily, you never know when you're going to need it. So how do you actually have personal well-being plans that really think about this? And I'm coming in to think about a couple of things that we could do. So I have a need, for many reasons I could tell you about, and I'll say a bit more in the seminar this afternoon, to exercise. But there is a cracking, if you want to do one thing, and Sir Muir Gray says, this will have a huge impact on our health if we all took more exercise. It's a panacea for nearly all long-term conditions. And you think, okay, David, that's really interesting. You've got a passion on exercise. So what? Okay, so what? So here's my case example. Here's a GP who, when I interviewed him, he looks younger than when I saw him. He's now 77. He looks about 55. He's so passionate. He's another Patrick. But there was a church with Epiphany. It was going to be closed. And they're thinking, what should they do? Plan A, could it be a wedding centre? They ended up with Plan G because the local gym was being priced out of the market up the road. So they took up some pews and 300 people came in and they put some gym equipment in there. It was going to be closed, but it's now got 1,500 members. But they kept the chapel. They kept praying. It was covered in prayer. It started in prayer. It works with the local church, St. John's, and they oversee. They've now got people, it's run by somebody who's had prison experience, and they enable people to have reaching out into the prison. They're reaching out into the community. Lives are being transformed. But could we think of an active church movement? Exercise is a panacea. Can we get more people in exercise and moving forward? This slide, the House of Good Health, just that's worth knowing. That is a good slide to know because it says the evidence is, if you look at the church activities, it's around 4% equivalent of health spending, We're already doing a lot. And so, my last slide, this is where I work, lovely Delapree Abbey in Northampton. And those are the four things, but the opportunity to link to green social prescribing, well-being and heritage sites, which includes churches, and a lot are going to be closed. The Church of Scotland selling off 25%. So actually, what could they be? Could they be well-being hubs? And can we be considering this as, and imagining this for the future?
Thank you. So, continuing on the theme of wellbeing hubs, I'm just going to talk a little bit about a wellbeing hub that I had something to do with a few years ago. The Edgbaston Wellbeing Hub was something that lasted for about 3 or 4 years, and it was a place where we were able to connect mental health involvement and expertise, and across the range. There was an all-age service from children to older adults. It was designed to be a primary care service, so it wasn't about diagnosis fundamentally. It was about what's happened to you. What can we do to help? What can we help to do to instill in you possibility? We looked around for who are the best people to be the focus, the triage people. And we worked out pretty quickly it was our chaplains. Because the chaplains we had who were working in our team at the time all had some basis of experience in healthcare, which made a big difference. But the thing they were able to do more than anything was just to provide a place where people in chaos could come and be helped to some sort of clarity. And believe it or not, within coming out of the health service, there are very few places where that is possible. Everyone wants to pigeonhole you as to, well, exactly what are you? What is it, the condition you've got? Sorry, we're not funded for that. I can't do that. We'll have to go somewhere else. Somebody else your GP will find something else for you. This is the perennial story. Whereas the heart of being human is to be uncertain and to be challenged. We've seen many iterations of that. And to be, in a sense, in a state of chaos quite often. Whether you have faith or whether you have no faith, life is tumultuous. And so what was really good was be able to have this front door, and we said deliberately, you have come to the right place. So whatever it is that you can deal with is not too big for us, because we can find someone else who's going to help you, which felt so much more welcoming. So the impact on local GPs was phenomenal. And I just want to tell you a very brief story to illustrate how we inadvertently managed to overcome the taboo of spirituality. So obviously chaplains are considered to be vicars, aren't they? And so they're all people who are coming from a perspective, in some people's minds, that they're trying to convert people to their way of thinking and their belief. We had one particular GP in our commissioning group who was quite vociferous. He was an activist for his patients. He was very protective, but he was really antagonistic towards faith. Didn't see why we had to have chaplains and stuff. We had this, but we nevertheless we installed the chaplains in his practice, and about 6 months later, he stood up in a meeting with loads of people there and the chaplains there too, almost in tears, saying what a difference it had made to his patients and how, notwithstanding his own reservations about faith and so on, he really saw that there was a transformation in people. And I think there was something about that which was you can't trick people, but you can give them what they need. You can give people what they need. They need love. They need a sense of security and enablement when they're in a position of vulnerability. And if you give those people those things, whatever you call it, it's spirituality. And giving people and demonstrating to people love is what changes their lives, essentially. And so I just want to sort of describe, going back to this kintsugi idea, what is it that is the gold in between those cracks? And I kind of thought, really, it's the power of love expressed with skill. And some of that skill is about really understanding how you can link that whole person together, how you can recognize that we're a body, we're a mind, we've got cultural, we've got social, we've got economic problems, but essentially the spirit is what holds us together. That's it. We don't know what to call it, but that's what it is. That's the essence of who we are. And validating the asking of big questions, which the GMC says we should be doing, is essentially spirituality. It's allowing people to be honest and be truthful with their questions. We also need to learn to talk differently. We need to be asking different questions. What has happened to you rather than what's wrong with you all the time? Of course you need diagnosis. That's not an issue. That goes alongside. We need to be learning to talk differently, particularly so we can, as doctors, medical professions. And then we also need to relearn the magic of listening. Listening is the generative way that we enable people to find their to start to communicate and distinguish between their full self and their true self. That thing about top down and bottom up that was so helpfully described by Chris earlier. That sense that most of us are walking around with our full self on the outside, and we need help because that becomes fractured, and then we misunderstand what really is going on in our lives, and we're seeking external affirmation and so on. So essentially, then we empower people to find their own solutions and to be healed in the process of doing so. And for me, that is a sense of incarnation and redemption. And for some people, they may be difficult words to deal with, but essentially, it's an idea that not that we have all the solutions inside, but if we're made in the image of God, we are linked to the magic and the mystery of God, and we just can't see that a lot of the time because of everything else that's surrounding it. And that's what I see is really important for us to be able to see in our services. Now, the difficulty, of course, is that we get stuck because we still are focused on the body, the mind, the spirit, all being separate things. What are the big challenges we've got are in research and development and evidence. And I hope that ACGP are going to be a part of that. And I know there are places that are interested in this. But it's wonderful to be in a place, I suppose, where people are saying the same things over and over and over again. But we do need the what next. And that's the big challenge we've got. Sorry, Daphne. So what happened to Daphne? So Daphne, a few years after the original thing that happened, I started speaking to this another woman on the phone. She couldn't come in. She was racked with anxiety. She was racked with pain. Her son had just died in a car crash, and she couldn't leave the house. And her son was in his early 20s, and she just couldn't deal with it. And she was tearful when I said, "Can you come down to surgery?" But she said, "Okay, well I can, but my friend will bring me." So we arranged an appointment. He would come down, and but lo and behold, it's Daphne is the friend. So Daphne brings this other woman, and the other woman's other son has just had an episode of first episode psychosis. So to add insult to injury, she's just completely overwhelmed. But there is Daphne. And Daphne has found the resilience and the strength and the love to be able to walk alongside this woman and give her, in humour and in teasing and cajoling and resilience and support, what she was given by the chaplain all those years ago. And for me, that was just a beautiful sign of an illustration of the kintsugi in her life. She is broken. She's still a bit broken, but she's got gold all the way through that brokenness.
Thanks so much. This is the last slide, you'd be pleased to know. But this really put me on to Sir Nigel Crisp, and this is his book on health creation. And he's looked around the country and around the world. He was the chief executive of the NHS. And it's his real thinking around what it is that could enable us to have health creation. And he happily came up with 10 things. And funnily enough, I like 10 things because it fits into my model and thinking and my thinking about the great dream. And rather neatly, those words in black are of his chapters. Interestingly, he didn't include exercise and diet, which is actually the biggest thing we could actually do to improve our national health. But I've tried to incorporate that with my words of integrated care. The bottom is the 3 words and the Health Creation Alliance, just to make you aware of that organisation, who are really looking at these 3 things: connections, confidence and control. So I'm around for the day. I look forward to continuing to learn together and share together, as we all do, as how we can improve the health of our nation and include our own health and our well-being as we think of how we can live happier lives, hopefully kinder and together. Thank you.